Welcome to Fueling Your Legacy, hosted by Samuel Knickerbocker. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a new, stronger foundation essential in creating your legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. Welcome back to Fueling Your Legacy. We have an awesome guest, and actually her son is joining us as well. Her son Joshua, and then Lorrie Richins are here. Lorrie is a personal and family empowerment coach, motivational speaker, and currently is in the process of writing 2 books. Her path has been one of trauma to triumph, and despite the suffering and loss of her experiences, she believes that our lives are perfectly designed to give us the greatest joy and to reach our highest potential. She's done just a ton of incredible things in her life. One of the things that she believes about family, this whole week is about family, is when we address and heal the pain from our past, we gain insight and tools to fortify our family union. So we're going to have her talk a little bit more about that. And then fun fact about her is that she actually, I believe it was last year, you ran for the state representative?
I did this year.
Oh, this year she ran as a state representative for Idaho, right?
Yeah, for our district, which actually included your family's district as well, down in Parma.
Yeah, so that's cool. She almost won. She got 41% of the vote, and
against a 2-time incumbent. So
that's so crazy. It's awesome.
Quite a
so
run,
cool.
Yeah.
So Lorrie, I've obviously had the opportunity to learn a lot more about you just before we got on here, but I'm curious, what would you like? I just would love for you to introduce kind of your background, your biography, you could say, maybe in short form, to give context to the conversation that we're going to have today about family and how family affects our legacies.
Okay, great. I was actually born and raised in a Midwestern little mining community town. And when I was 16 years old, I moved up to Alaska, and I had a lot of great things happen up there, including my future husband drove up there to work. And we met and dated all summer, and then we got married. And so I've been married since I was 18 years old, and we're actually celebrating our 35th anniversary this month. And it's been just a great experience. But shortly after we were married, I actually started experiencing a lot of nightmares. I would scream in my sleep. I would sometimes have dreams where I would find myself unable to have any sound at all come out of my throat. And we didn't really know what was happening. I was losing weight. I just had a lot of trauma that I was realizing I was being impacted by from some experiences of my youth, but we didn't entirely know where it was stemming from. And what was interesting actually is I went to a counselor trying to kind of break that down, and he said something I didn't really realize was true. And he said people who have trauma, the post-traumatic effect of it usually won't be revealed until they're in a safe place. And so it was about 2 years after I was married, and I was in an environment which was very calm and safe, that I started to realize that I had some pretty critical things I still had to address. And it took a toll on our family. And so I have an intense passion as I've worked through this, and as I've managed to be blessed with this exceptional family that I have now. I really strive to be a support system for families who are trying to strengthen their unit and try to deal with some unresolved issues that maybe are putting pressure on their family dynamic.
That is awesome. So I can relate to, I've never heard it put that way, that it's manifest, I guess. The stress is manifest when you're in a safe place. For me, I would relate though. For me, I first really started processing after I had moved out of my house and got to a more gentler, kinder environment where I was able to actually process and grow a lot from my own childhood and heal those things. And now really my hope is to help people get into that safe space in their own family so they can process. One thing I think is interesting, or I would love more insight in from you, is yes, it's going to manifest itself however it does, which could be different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Could manifest in addiction, could manifest in violence, in reclusiveness,
Suicide.
I mean, it could manifest in a lot of different ways. How would somebody who has maybe hit that, right? This, I think it's a recognition of lack of identity in a lot of parts, or at least lack of facing the identity that you've been given and blessed with. How does somebody recognize that that's where their stress is coming from, and that it's not like a medical condition or something else that's happening then? How can we help people just start thinking, okay, what happened in my past, or how can we go back to those situations and help those?
That's a great question. I actually don't think it needs to be one or the other, because people who've had extreme stress often have a health issue associated with that. For me, as time went on, I was able to discover that I was having adrenal exhaustion, and I was losing weight. Considerably a lot of weight. I was starting to look very gaunt. I was malnourished. It was kind of a cyclical type situation that became even more challenging with the babies that I had, of course, because then you're dealing with a lot of hormone shifting, you're dealing with a lack of sleep. So sometimes people can really cope well with their past circumstances when their life is relatively stress-free. For me, when my oldest hit 3 or 4 years old, I remember actually walking into her bedroom. She was on the top bunk of her bed, and something happened inside me. Something triggered me when I was looking at her at that eye level with her on the top bunk. And there was like this sudden detachment that happened within me. And I thought, this is so strange. What just happened? Why did I detach in this moment? And then, of course, I would realize later that around that same age, some things had happened to me. So women in particular, I can speak for, if maybe they had some events that happened while they were young, and then they're handling it fairly well as an adult, when they become a parent, that can trigger some memories or some emotions that maybe they're not prepared for. And so I had to go down both paths. I had to find out what were my health issues and what were maybe some emotional trauma that was not yet properly healed, to help me to get into my highest functioning place.
And so I'm curious, do you feel like, along with the health issues, along with the healing, do you feel like, because obviously at this point you're already married, you already have multiple kids. I can say for myself that I've had blanked out years of my childhood because of the trauma. And exactly what you're saying, when you see somebody entering that age of where you have no recollection because you've blanked it out intentionally or subconsciously, then you end up not relating, right? Not being able to have that type of relationship because you've ignored that part of your life intentionally or unintentionally. But
sometimes we do it for survival.
Yeah, survival. I think it's intentional, but just like we don't recognize that we need to intentionally connect with it. But do you think it affected your lack of willing to connect with those experiences? Did that affect your ability to connect with your spouse or with other people in any way?
Absolutely. And again, one of the things that is really unfair to spouses who marry a woman or a man who has trauma in their past is that, at least for me, there was this kind of maybe unwritten expectation that maybe he can fix it. If he behaved a certain way, or if he said a certain thing, or if he did something for me, that somehow it would help to make me better. And it's not...
Question. Is that an unwritten expectation by him or by you?
It was by me.
Okay.
And it was really this interesting dynamic that we went through, because he saw this really powerful, strong woman, and he kept thinking that I was going to eventually resolve the situation on my own. And so he tried to give me the physical support that he could and listen and talk to me, but he simply did not have the skills to know the depth of the damage or to know how to heal it. So when I work with clients, and if as a personal and family empowerment coach, and as a mentor of sometimes marriages, sometimes individuals, and children, all ages. When I work with them, particularly in a marriage situation, I make sure they understand it is not the spouse's job to fix you. And when you have expectations, perhaps like that unintentionally, maybe it can create a lot of challenges within your family dynamic. My husband did not have the skills. He was not raised in the same environment that I was. And so and neither one of us really knew the extent of how much pain I would eventually be subject to, because I was a very vivacious woman, and I acted older than I was, hence getting married at 18, and there was a lot of maturity that I already had at a young age, and so we were both kind of blindsided about what would later manifest. And this is completely unfair to my husband, and perhaps some women out there who've had some challenges in their past like that. It's unfair to them too, because we sometimes project onto our husbands things that they are completely not responsible for. Like I would have dreams where maybe he was doing something he shouldn't be doing, and there was no indication whatsoever that he had ever done something to cause me to feel that way. But because I had been so subject to that by a variety of different men growing up, I was putting that onto him in my dreams, not in reality, of course. But so they're fighting, things in a closet that they're not responsible for on any level. And so I really empathize with the spouse trying to help their husband or wife heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a few things I want to touch on that before we move on. But the word responsible, I think, is often misunderstood. Mm-hmm. They take it both responsible and accountable. Oftentimes we think of this as the full word, and we think responsible and accountable. But it really helps me, and it's helped a lot of my clients to dissect the word. Responsibility. What is your ability to respond in a situation?
Yes.
Accountability. Are you actually able to account? Accountability is something that is I can't hold somebody accountable for something because they have to be willing to account. And if they don't have the ability to account, then I can't force them to account. They have to choose to be accountable. And they have to choose to have that ability. And same with responsibility. If you don't have the ability to respond, you can't be held responsible.
Which goes back to that premise that he didn't have the training, he didn't have the insight, nor did I. And exactly. So we were both floundering. And I don't want to mislead by saying that our world was always in that sense of pain and suffering, because it wasn't. We had some really beautiful things happening at the same time with our children coming, and they're all very special children. But what I was dealing with on a personal level, I was a very highly functional person from a dysfunctional history. And sometimes we have no idea how much someone can still perform at a high level while they're still in a tremendous amount of suffering. And most people didn't have any idea what I was going through. It was very confusing even for me. And so, yeah, as time would go on, eventually I would have life experiences which would actually release a vault-like encapsulation that I had in my brain of certain things that were so detrimental, so horrific, actually, that though I survived it as a child, it nearly killed me as an adult. And the pain was such that there's a scene from The Sea of Trees with Matthew McConaughey in it. I don't know if you've heard of that. Have you?
I tried to watch that movie. It was too slow for me. I'd be honest. I tried, but I was I can't handle this.
Do you remember this particular scene? So he's in Japan in this huge grove of trees, right? And that's where people go to end their lives, right? So he goes into this place, and we don't know why he's wanting to end his life. We just know that something's happened that's so severe that he's decided this is what he's going to do. But then somebody else comes along who's in a serious health situation. He's injured. And so Matthew's character has to then focus on helping him get out of the grove so he can get assistance. And the entrance from which he came is no longer apparent. They can't find it. So they're stuck together for a period of time. and have more trials that they have to undergo. But there's a conversational moment in that movie where the gentleman, if I'm remembering correctly, asks him, why did you come here? Why did you come to do this? And he said, it's not that I wanted to die. It's just that I didn't want to live. And I think a lot of people who are taking their lives, I think that's what's happening. I think it's not that they want to die, it's just their coping capacity to deal with pain isn't such that they can go on living. And there came a point where just the intensity of the pain was so severe that I certainly did not want to die, but I thought I can live this long. I can live from this period to this particular date. And when I get to that date, I know I cannot live after that. And there was a sense of relief that I had that, okay, I can bear up this pain this long. And fortunately, the time came and went, and I stayed. But my husband almost lost his wife, and my children almost lost their mother, and they had no clue that I was in that level of distress. And so what I think is really important, at least for me, is the more I talk to people, the more I'm realizing how normal that is, where there are many, many people who are here who chose a time in their life when they couldn't believe they could stand the pain any longer. And so part of my passion is to help people in that journey from pain to peace and purpose and power. And hence the personal and family empowerment coach title that I use. And it's amazing when somebody has a support system in place who's already walked that path and who can really empathize and understand each of the steps that they're in, and just give them some clarity about what their next step could be, and get some of that pressure off the spouse, get some of that pressure off the family so that they can gain the knowledge they need to just keep moving forward and to find happiness. Because I have these 7 children, and 4 of them have married well, and I have 3 younger children doing very well. They're successful. And as I said, my husband and I have been married for 35 years. We're stronger than ever. And we like to be a resource for other people. And so it's doable. It's doable to get past that place into another place where you find a great purpose for all of the experiences that you've had.
Yeah, no, I think what's cool is that it's not just doable. In my perspective, I would say it's necessary, not just to get past it, but I believe that everybody's going to have these experiences in their relationship at some point. Maybe not as drastic, maybe not as bad, but there has to be at some point where people are making extreme sacrifices for each other to build the bond of unity and to build the understanding and the belief. It adds to a belief and a trust that that person will be there when you need them to be there. And those experiences, they can be good or bad, but they do lend to that feeling. And going back maybe two questions ago, because this just popped in my head, but you had trauma in your past that you had to deal with, that you didn't know you needed to deal with before you got married. I think sometimes it's easy to think that we have trauma and our trauma is worse than others. I'm not saying that that's how you feel, but it's definitely a thought that I've encountered multiple times when I'm coaching people financially in marriage relationships. They think, well, their stuff is worse than mine, or my stuff is worse than theirs. And what I've come to really know and understand is everybody has their own trauma. Everybody has their own things that they didn't like about their childhood. Everybody has their own things that they need to work through when it comes to the confrontation of another person's childhood, the differences, and working through those. That's always going to be an important aspect to a relationship, in spousal relationship, or in parent-childhood relationship,
or in friendship
relationships. Yeah, exactly. Just that ability to have compassion and understanding for each other, rather than an ego judgment based, you should be doing this, I should be doing this, or even if it's not even extrinsic, but just completely intrinsic, and saying I should be, we're condemning ourselves. Even if we're the only ones talking negative to ourselves, that still has huge negative ramifications in our ability to connect and have those relationships with others. And so that's an important thing
Can I add
Yeah,
to that a
yes,
little bit?
please.
So I have a friend who I just treasure, and we met as adults. And it was interesting, the transition I went from really admiring this person, and I'm going to be very raw with you. So I went from admiration to resentment, because I realized the type of life that she was given was everything that I wished I had been given. And when I recognized just the stability that she had and the safe environment in her home and the sibling circumstances, and two parents, my mom was married 3 times, and that that's not traumatic in and of itself. It was just that my mom herself, the first time she was married, I believe she was 15 years old. And so she had 4 children by the time I came. I was her 4th child, and she was 21 or 22 at the time. And so she had a lot of her own challenges that she had to deal with, being a young bride and working through maybe some of her own life experiences. So she had limited capacity to offer what I personally needed. And then, of course, we were in an environment where there were a lot of unsafe people in our surroundings. And so with some of the breakdown of my family dynamics, I went from really just cherishing this person to, I remember specifically seeing her across the floor one day and thinking, I really had a hard time even looking at her. I was so envious. And I thought it's so unfair that she would be given this amazing package, like 11 or 12 siblings, and just this rock solid family unit. And it was just really beautiful. And I realized that I was murmuring, like I was literally speaking to my Father in heaven and saying, if you would have given me that, if you would have given me that life, if you would have given me that opportunity, that package, I would have been so much more. I would have had more to give my own family. I would have just been better overall. And after a period of murmuring, it didn't take long before I was corrected. And in my mind, I heard very clearly these words: no, Lorrie, you would have been less. And I took that and realized that my individual nature, my individual capacity to take an experience or a variety of experiences from my life and then transform it and make it something useful and better and stop the pattern that I had experienced or been subject to and make it better for my family was something that I had within me. And as I've spoken to this dear friend of mine, and we're very, very close now, her circumstances have been very different than mine, but her pain is her pain. And she could not have survived mine, but her life would have been too easy for me in many respects. So I'm grateful for the package that I have. And I'm grateful that I've been able to pass the life lessons down to my children. And having Joshua here, he can attest to the conversations that we've had. And because he and I are so alike, I've been able to say, okay, when I was young, what would I have wanted from a parent? What would I have needed to hear? What would I have wanted to have presented for me? And then I've made sure to give that to him. And so sometimes, with all the good that I had as well, sometimes a bad example is actually more effective than a good, because you own the life lesson. You own what was given to you then, right? And you learn. One thing that I teach my clients is that it's one thing, like my friend has had, where she kind of just gets to carry on the ball, keep the ball moving. And then those of us who maybe have to change the pattern, we have 3 assignments in life. We have to recognize and see, I call it the 3 S's. We have to see what was detrimental to a healthy upbringing. We have to recognize the things that shouldn't have happened in that way. And that takes some effort to peer into your past. We live in a day where you hear a lot of people say, just leave the past in the past and move forward. Well, that's where our ammunition is. The ammunition for this really strong future comes from our past, right? So you see it and you recognize it. And step 2 is then you have to stop what you don't want to continue on. And that takes effort as well. Sometimes, in fact, I just was teaching a class to a group of doing a presentation to a group of homeschoolers. And one of them said, well, how do you stop it if you don't know that it was bad? Like, where do you go to know if maybe your behavior isn't ideal? And I said, that's when you become a pattern seeker. That's what I did. I had to look at families and I had to see that that was healthy. And I had to see, that the children were happy. and that the couple, the husband and wife relationship was really wholesome and good. And so I read a lot of literature, and I watched people, and then I was mentored by people that could help me find a better way. So first you see it, and then you stop it, and then you start something new. And when you have a pattern, then that can really help you. And one of the ways that I help my clients too, when I'm trying to teach them a concept that maybe they can't wrap their brain around, or maybe they're in so much pain that they can't become an observer, they're part of the forest.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give them a movie, and I'll say, watch this and pay attention to this scene. This is what I need you to understand. And so that's one of the ways that I mentor them, so that they can get into the viewer position and become the student instead of the sufferer. Does that make sense?
No, that's awesome. I think for that skill, you actually have to be able to remember movies. My wife, very good at this. For me, it's not one of my strengths of remembering movies. So I appreciate you doing the same for me and saying, hey, Sam, go watch this movie, October Baby, and kind of dissect the family dichotomy of what's going on, the movements, the communications. And I'm generally very hyper communication aware.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's saying something because of the life skills or things that I've had, then I have become, I would say, expert at reading body language, reading tone, reading intention, and a large part of that, what I would say ability to read is the willingness to be wrong, not so certain that, well, I saw you do this, so that means that
must mean
this. It is more of, okay, that's a level of feedback that I'm going to receive, that I'm going to assess, process, and then confirm whether that's the right feedback or not. And at least I know that manner, that the way you walked through the door, the gait in your step, or the way your eyes are shifting, or how long it took you to respond, is just a few seconds longer than it should have if we were if everything was fine, right? So being able to read those things, gestures, that's a skill that I have. Presence, but not like retroactive or watching it on TV. I'm not not as good. I really like just to be entertained when I watch TV most of the time.
Which actually leads me to something you may find interesting. So one of my ways, or one of my stumbling blocks, I think that I really experienced, was I did not understand how this higher power could allow children to be harmed without some sort of intervention. That was really, really difficult for me, because I'm the type that if I can find value in an experience, then I can move forward. But I felt like that was just causing me to be really stuck. Like, how could this happen? This horrible injustice take place. And the older I've gotten, actually, and the more I've studied about people who have abuse or trauma in their past, it actually does something to the brain, which makes them more intuitive, and they can be really highly effective assessors in their environment, and it can empower them to do a lot of great things. The challenge with that is our higher peaked sensitivity can actually create some adrenal issues, because we process a lot more energy. And so sometimes you have to eat a little differently, foods that can help ground you, or to make you a little more steady, I guess, because we are so sensitive to the things around us. So it can be very, very beneficial. And that's one thing too, that we've tried to raise our children to be very sensitive and intuitive as well in their surroundings. And so you can pass that on to your family unit. But also, when you learn to manage that, what a blessing. You can be very compassionate. You can be very empathetic. You can have a lot of skills that come naturally because of your life experience that some people really struggle to develop. It's just not innate. So we can look at those experiences as being a gift that came in maybe not such a great package, in such attractive wrapping.
Yeah,
would you say?
No, I completely agree. And that's kind of when I construct these podcasts and the method in which I do, every coach, every mentor, every professional in their own right, they have a method of going about a accomplishing something.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I tend to speak a lot to myself a few years ago, but then I also tend to speak to a mid-aged woman who's going through a life crisis. And I don't know why I've been blessed with that, but from a very young age, I've always studied. And this is a one area that I remember movies. But part of what I chose to study, knowing one day that I would end up marrying a woman, that was one of my goals, was to marry a woman. And I chose to not just study how I wanted to treat and how I thought was effective to treat, but what is the world, what is the surroundings that what's the environment she's being raised in, the media speaking to her and demonstrating of how she should be treated.
How she how's she integrating that?
So chick flicks are something that I can watch a chick flick most days and enjoy it, all of them, because for me, that's my research. That's okay. Unfortunately, this is how you've been primed to respond to a certain situation. And I understand that. I'm here with you. I get that. What if we were able to reposition our thoughts, our perspective, and take a different meaning out of an experience? And so these questions that I like to ask in these interviews, they're really in succession of helping you go back to these painful experiences. Mm-hmm. Hopefully by this point, they're not as painful, but sometimes they are, but reassess the good things about them. How can we draw something positive out of the most negative experience that we've experienced? And so to that end, I'm curious to start, what do you really feel like is your greatest success that you've accomplished up to this point in your life?
So I'm going to answer that in two ways. I was actually speaking to a gentleman recently, and he presented a situation that he was in such a way that my mentor hat went on, and immediately I told him a story that I thought might be helpful for him. And he said something that really helped me as well, because he said, don't misunderstand, I wasn't wanting a solution, like there's value in the struggle that I'm in. And I love that, because don't you think there's a time when we just need to hold someone's space, and we need to just say, I'm here and I understand what you're in right now, and I know that you're going to gain all that you need in this experience, and I'm not going to rescue, I'm just going to wait. And if you need me, I'm here. And so I just want to throw that in there, because I think it's really important. My success has been able to learning to define how I can be a resource to help people. Do I need to help them problem solve by my experience, or do I need to pull from within them knowledge that they already have that just needs to be tapped into? Because most people have this amazing power within them that maybe has been shut down or not acknowledged. And we're going to talk about that with an experience I had. But I think my greatest success has been transforming the life experience that I was been given, taking the good. And in fact, Bruce Springsteen said this in an interview regarding his own childhood. He said, I've learned to take the best and leave the rest. And so to take those life experiences, the good, and pass that along, but then also to transform for my children the pattern that I had, and give them this solid environment, but also to not have them be naive regarding the world and what can really happen out there. And so do you think we could have Josh maybe respond about that? What do you think has been your greatest gift coming into a family dynamic like ours?
I would say definitely the fact that your unique experiences, as well as my father's, has provided insight and perspective that I would never have had otherwise. And with that, you've evaluated them and extrapolated principles and lessons that have been very profound for me, and also for my older and younger siblings. And just like even today, very simply, we were put in a situation that was shockingly similar to something that my mom experienced several years ago with my dad. And for me to have heard the story of how my dad reacted to that situation, I knew from instinct at this point, what do I need to do if this happens to someone I care about? And I was able to make a correct decision that if I didn't have that experience, or if my parents didn't have that experience, I would have been rather lost and rather concerned, rather scared. When in this situation, I was able to be very level-headed and very, hopefully I could say compassionate. Hopefully that was the way I was able to go that route, because I'm a logical person, so emotions are something that I hope to develop. But seeing that route that I probably wouldn't have seen previously was very helpful. And that was a great lesson. And I know there's only many more to come throughout the years based off of what my parents have gone through, and hopefully lessons that I have learned can be passed on to my children and grandchildren as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And just taking those experiences, it's so important to take those experiences and then learn to apply them. Mm-hmm. And once you've learned to apply them, learn to teach them. That's a skill in and of itself, is taking an experience and learning to teach it to where it's applicable in somebody's life and they can actually accept that. Now that I think comes from the importance of belief, right? If your mom, Lorrie, if you didn't believe that Joshua could actually comprehend and do these things and handle a situation like that, then he wouldn't believe in himself to be able to take on that message. Just as you chose to change your circumstances from what you grew up with and start something new, and he's hopefully going to take what you teach him and improve upon it, right?
Because we want even each generation to get better.
To get better, right? Not to digress. No digression. But that comes from a necessity to believe in other people. Now, as rough as your childhood was, tell me the story of when you first felt like somebody really believed in you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was such a gift. In my third stepfather, I have to really thank him for that. Looking back, he's the one responsible for getting me up to Alaska. We moved up there when I was 16. And so I've always loved language. I've always loved words, deep meaning behind stories. And so I think it was an advanced English class I was in, and there was a woman named Mrs. Wall who became my teacher. And when I was a senior, I became her personal aide. And so I remember being in her office, and she was playing classical music in her office. And I remember just being intrigued by this. And I loved the sound. And it was just, she was a very dignified woman, and she dressed really classy, and she spoke so eloquently. And I still remember of, famous characters she would talk about and share life principles about that individual. And so I just melted into that environment. And there came a point where, as an aide, of course, she would give me homework assignments from other students and a key with a red pencil, where I would use the key to correct the, A, B, C, D, the fill in the blanks, things like that. And that would be expected. But there eventually came a time when she was actually handing me the essays from the students in her writing class. And I was correcting grammar, and I was correcting sentence structure and giving suggested grades. And I remember, processing this, thinking, wow, this is kind of a unique responsibility she's giving me as a fellow student. But I didn't think much about it beyond that. And as I grew up and had my own family, she would actually stop and see me. She saw me a couple different times traveling through my area in Idaho, which was such a gift. And she truly loved me as an individual. And every Christmas we would write one another, and she was always interested in what was happening in my life, and as I was with her. And she was attending operas. She had moved to Washington by then and teaching at a private college, and she was attending operas and going on cruises and doing all these amazing things. And I was just raising my family, which was important as well. But she came one day, and I said, Mrs. Wall, I really want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to correct those papers. Like, I realized that was a significant responsibility. And she said, Lorrie, she said, in all my years that I taught, you were the only student I ever gave that responsibility to. And she was one of those key mentors in my life that saw potential in me and thought that I was just a really special person. And one of the letters that I received from her, I still have. And in this letter, it was always typewritten and it was to perfection. But she wrote this little phrase and she said, "You are one of the few people in life that makes life worth living." And I just, those kinds of words remain in your mind for a long time. And there came a moment where my Christmas cards were no longer being returned. I wasn't getting any from her. And so I actually looked up on the internet to see if she had died unexpectedly, and she had. And I wept, and it was such a loss. And in her obituary, it actually said that she found great satisfaction in mentoring the minds of young men and young women. And I thought that was certainly the role she played for me. And I was one of the few people that she kept in touch with for all of those years. And so I try and do that for others. And I think about especially someone like Joshua. And like I said, I think you're a talker like I'm a talker. Like I really like to break down life experiences, right? And then share that. And I was one of those children that always asked why, and I needed to have things explained to me, and that wasn't always easy for the people in my environment. You understand what I'm saying, don't you?
Yeah, it's not easy.
It's not. And so I have these intelligent children, and when would you say, do you think we talk a lot?
Oh, you're funny.
When do we talk? Would you say late at night, early in the
I just remember
morning?
growing up, like any situation that we were together, there would be some sort of conversation. And it's partly the reason because we're both similarly minded. We both think the same. We speak the same language. But yeah, I remember distinctly nights going 2 or 3 in the morning, just talking for hours on end about life, about lessons learned, her mentoring me, and walks underneath the stars. Like we would just talk, and it was normal for us to have life lessons be a topic that was common and that was thought of in depth as well as very simple.
And I think that's one of the greatest tools that we can give to families is really learn how to communicate with each other and have them be safe. There came a time to say what they need to say. There came a time not long ago when one of my children actually checked himself out of school and came home and was just really distraught about something that he had experienced, and he was so shaken. By the time he walked in the door, he was just quaking. And so he laid down on the couch, and I did some work. I'm an energy worker, and so I did some things to just kind of fortify him. And then I heard the story unfold of what he was dealing with. And so many youth end up kind of becoming like a pack mindset with fellow youth who are not skilled when they talk amongst themselves. They don't have the life skills to know what to do when a traumatic event happens. So it keeps circulating within them, and they keep it secret. And so there were a lot of things that happened to me that my parents did not know, my siblings did not know, and I didn't tell anyone. And then, of course, that monster eventually got me by the time I was older because I'd shut a lot of it out. So I think it's critical that you create an environment where no matter how traumatic it is, they feel like they can come and tell you what occurred, and then you can walk them through the next step. And that was really helpful to me, or whatever time of the night or day it happens to be that they can talk to you.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. And it's interesting. Two things are interesting to me about that story. And one is I can absolutely relate with there comes a point in time. So I have a really good friend that he moved to Parma, where I grew up, well, from like age 9 to 14. And I don't know why I felt connected to him or whatever the case may be, but he's somebody that I always looked up to. And as I grew, then I won't say the tables have turned completely. I still look up to him completely as a mentor and somebody I can always bounce ideas off of, spiritual ideas, just life ideas, anything. I can always talk to him, and we always have a great conversation. But there comes a point in time where that admiration is then returned on like a friend equal basis. So when you become friends with your mentor, when you become to the point where you and your mentor are learning from each other,
mutual respect,
the mutual respect of the learning, that's a very interesting thing. It sounds like that's what you went through with the person who first believed in you, Mrs. Wall,
yes.
Right? is there came a point in time where those roles were either not necessarily reversed, but turned to each other, where you respected her and she respected you for what you'd become, knowing maybe that she had a part in it, but still recognizing and respecting that you had become that in your own right. And I saw that happen with my friend and I, but I also saw that happen to a degree with my mother. And it's cool to see like a mom and son who have a great relationship and can talk about things, because that same thing, there was a point in my life where it happened a lot more dramatically and maybe not as respectful as sounds like you guys have achieved in your relationship. But there was a point where I asserted my independence from my mother as a mother or as a mom figure, and we became friends. And that friendship is one of the most cherished things in my life. The ability that I'm able to be friends with my parents is really important to me. I think that denotes a closer relationship than
the mother-daughter,
than mother-daughter or mother-son, whatever. Right? The ability to be friends with somebody, and what's cool about being a friend is with your friends generally, there's no pretense of leadership. And when I say pretense of leadership, I mean, I'm a parent of a little son now. He's a year and a half, and I'm about to have another one hopefully this week sometime or next week. But I still want to be an example to him. I still want to lead him, and I feel like I have an obligation to be teaching.
Yes.
Right? Well, and so that pretense of leadership, right? It's not necessarily pretense, but you feel like obligated that you're supposed to be the leader. But with your friends, you're learning from each other. You're willing to be actually more vulnerable with your friends than you will with those you're supposed to lead. And there's good reason for that, I think. But what is unique is when you and your children, and you can have that friendship relationship of both being willing to share your struggles, both being willing to learn from each other's struggles, even though they're in different maybe generations, and you still are mother and son. That ability to be vulnerable and be friends is so crucial, especially when you're getting over some of your hardest times in your life, the things that you struggle with the most in your life. How do you open up if you can't? And that's exactly what you said. You're just like a lot of people, they just don't open up because they don't feel comfortable. They don't know who to open up to.
Well, I'd like to break that down in a couple of different ways, because what I found is I use my children as resources. Sometimes if I need to have some feedback on something, or if I'm in a scenario, he's excellent. He's a very wise young man. But I also know, having walked the path that I did, I still yearn for a mother. I still yearn for a dad. I didn't find my birth father until 2 years ago. And to actually be able to say the word dad, and to have somebody speak to me as that father figure and give me wise counsel. I was 50 years old before I found him. And so I love that we have that friendship dynamic, like what you're saying, but I also know my children, until they die, will need a mother. And they will need a father. And when the time comes when that hat has to go back on, where I'm your mother now, I'm going to help and step up in a mother role, is what helps stabilize that family unit. And eventually, as parents, we won't be here any longer. And then that, next matriarch and patriarch kind of comes up through the line. But I will not give up my post as a mother until I'm done. And one of our favorite, well, I don't think I ever get done, but one of our favorite books that we've always cherished as a family was I'll Love You Forever, I'll Like You for Always, as long as I'm living, my baby will be the I Love You Forever book. And it's wonderful because the mother eventually gets old, and then the roles reverse where the son takes care of his mother. It's just such a sweet story.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that there does come a point in time where the roles will reverse, and although the mother's the mother and the son's the son, there is a reversal in roles as far as who's the carer,
the caregiver,
who's the leader, who's the not decision maker from a negative, like I'm making decisions, but who's the responsible person.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because one thing that I find too, and I just had a client situation with this same thing, and I could really speak to it. It's not that my mom intended for it. But when you see your mom suffering, and when you see your mother in situations that are painful for her, sometimes children step up and take over the nurturing role too young. They take over the role of being the emotional support too young. And that's what happened to me. And I started feeling responsible for my mother's well-being. And that's a really difficult thing to break. And as time went on, there were some things, as my eyes were being opened to what I should have been given as the child, how I should have been protected, how I should have been mentored, how I should have been trained up and taught, and so forth. And we're going to talk about the character of Vera here. I realized that I needed to take my position back and be the adult that wasn't responsible for my mother's well-being. And when I started to do that was when our relationship started to break. And that's a painful thing, because when this is something that I share that might be helpful for the people listening. So this is one thing I teach the people that come, and I've seen a pattern of what happens when one side of a scale shifts. So if you imagine a scale with a bar in the middle and a bar across the top, and then, you know, the kind of, what would you say?
I don't know what it's called. It's just a scale.
On each side, right?
Yeah.
With chains.
Cans of whatever to put in.
The weights.
Exactly. So in a relationship, whether it's a parent-child relationship or a spousal relationship, a friendship relationship, whatever it happens to be, imagine that over a period of time, there gets to be a level of equilibrium where people behave a certain way and it's just kind of level. Doesn't mean it's healthy. It just means it's level. And as soon as one person starts to shift their side, the other side automatically is impacted, right? You can't help that. So when people are trying to make improvements in their lives, or their eyes are being opened and they're saying, oh, I need to make these changes, or this maybe wasn't the best way, and they make a shift over here, or it could go the opposite direction. They could actually go into a worst case scenario. Then one of four things usually happens. The person on the other side is usually going to fall into one of four categories. They're going to get confused at first, and they're going to wonder, well, we've always had it this way, and why are you changing now? And they'll just kind of stay in a state of confusion, thinking it'll probably go back. It's probably temporary, right? The second one is they go into a state of confusion at first, and then they realize you're kind of holding the line, and they get angry about it. They don't like where it's at. And so they're going to manipulate you to try and go back to where it was. Okay. Number three is they don't care enough about the relationship to do anything with this new pattern that's in place. And so they jump ship. They just completely reject you and move away. And then the last one, of course, is the most ideal, where they go, you know, I don't fully understand everything that's happening right now, but you are so valuable to me. I'm going to stay in this until we find a new healthier balance. And that's really the best place we want to go to. And so sometimes when you come from a situation where you've been in a certain pattern and then you start making changes, it can be hard in the other circumstance, because then I stopped staying in the mentality with my mom of trying to emotionally support and sustain her. And I remember a conversation where after I'd had a pretty detrimental health situation, and she was calling regularly from Alaska and kind of checking on me, and she would say things like, yes, you're just like me. I was like that when I was your age. And she was kind of telling me where this was going. And finally I said, no, Mom, I'm my own person. Like, don't keep telling me that. Like, don't say that anymore. And that was the beginning of kind of the breakdown. And I realized, though, that that's okay. I still have to hold my place, and I still have to do what I know is healthiest for myself and my family. And I can still love the people that might not understand why I'm making the decisions that I am, but it's still what's best.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I actually, in my book that I wrote, 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy, the first section of it is relatable here. It's you need to do it for your haters. You need to be successful and build a legacy for your haters. And I use that word just because it's a trending word right now.
Yeah.
But really, it's the people that don't want to change. They aren't ready to believe in themselves, or they try and keep you from achieving what you know you need to achieve. But you need to do it for them, not to prove them wrong. I think sometimes people will hear that and I'm going to do it in spite of these people so I can go rub it in their face. It's not about that. It's about these people who are trying to detract you from reaching your potential, detract you from reaching your goals, detract you from really going for it in life. They don't believe in their own ability to do it. And so when they see somebody else doing it, they have to confront their own lack of action, their own insecurities, and that's uncomfortable for them. And so it's easier for them to project their insecurities onto you than to accept and process their insecurities. And so you're really you have to go win it in order to enable those haters, those people who don't believe in you or are trying to pull you down. You have to go win in order to enable them and be an example for them that they too can change, that they too can grow.
Which leads me to another angle with this too, that yes, sometimes when somebody has been in a pattern for so long, sometimes honestly in their mind, it's all that they know. And it's something that sometimes when you're still in it and you don't know that there's a better way, a better, healthier way, then there's a level of betrayal that they feel if you abandon that. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know that my mom ever think about that, being married at that age and moving into that life there. I don't know.
I can't imagine that.
One of the other questions I have to ask myself is what else might be true about my mom? I don't have all of the pieces. And when I was married and had, 4 or 5 children, we actually had this interaction, and I was feeling really uncomfortable. I was feeling stress. I was feeling strain. And my mom confronted me about this, and she wanted to know what was wrong with me. And this is why I feel this is really important to say this, because I absolutely know that this is a factor for some families out there. And I don't think my mom even understood what she was saying in this moment, but she said, my nickname used to be Skeeter. And she said, where is the Skeeter that used to take care of me? And I was married now with multiple children of my own. And I'm seeing this happen where there's a nobility, there's a sense of nobility that a child can feel, or a sense of satisfaction when they feel like they're stepping up and they can help their parents. And I think that we should in health situations and other things. But I don't think my mom really understood what happened to me in that moment, where I was screaming inside going, where's the mother, right, who should have taken care of me?
Yeah, no, it's an important question to ask. I think this will lead nicely into kind of my next question, because I think this is something we all must confront at some point in our life. And it's the thing about identity. Mm-hmm. And I think this whole life is really about identifying our identity in some form or fashion. Even when you think you've identified it, you're always changing, hopefully, and you're always growing and improving that identity and growing. But from a parental perspective, again, my kid is not old enough to tell me what he thinks of my parenting yet. And that'll be an interesting day for sure. But
we all get our turn.
But I can go through it from a child's perspective, right? Often we are given identities by others, and we get to choose whether we're going to accept those identities or not accept those identities. And sometimes we've accepted them begrudgingly for so long that it's easier to keep accepting those identities than to remove the identity. And there's that aspect of it, which I hope you'll address. But then the other aspect of it is to find power in that identity. And so I want you to share the story of, I believe it's your father or father-in-law who would call you a name of a character in the movie. Mm-hmm. Explain how that identity, how you first perceived the identity and accepted it and resented the identity, and then later were able to find fulfillment and power from the same identity. Because I know there's people listening who they've received identities from their children, from their parents, from their spouses, and they've just been living in these identities, and they think that because their initial experience or initial perspective on that identity was negative, that they're being put down upon, when in many cases, that identity may not be a negative identity at all, but a very meaningful, endearing identity from the person giving it. But it's just being interpreted wrong. So if you could share that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. And as a person of faith, I'd like to share maybe a deeper portion of this. I'm actually writing 2 books, and one is called Words of Wisdom for the Wounded and Weary. And so I'm taking some of my life experiences, and I'm hoping that as I share the lessons that I've learned and I found value in the challenges that I faced, that I can pass on some of the wonderful, wonderful gifts I've been given in this process. And so Words of Wisdom for the Wounded and Weary will be part of that, to just help people find joy in the journey, no matter how difficult it was. And the second one is Miracles and Messages from the Other Side of the Veil. And as a person of faith, through these experiences over the years, as I've deeply prayed and asked for help and guidance and understanding, I've had some kind of sweet experiences. And with propriety, I hope to be able to share that in a way that will also help people have kind of a spiritual explanation for some things too. And so there came a moment after I had found my birth father, which is an amazing story in and of itself. I was telling him, I was saying, and so we'll call my stepdad John, okay? And I said, John didn't want me. The only reason why I was kept was because I had to come with my mom. He wanted my mom. He didn't really want me. And I had no place else to go because I didn't have my dad. And there's actually a lot more depth to that. And so I was feeling this agony about that I was in a situation where just over the years, lots of things had happened. When I was a young girl, my brother threw a wrench at me and he said, the only reason your mother kept you is because no one else would have you. So that was a brutal thing to carry in my mind, well, didn't my mom want me, and what happened there? And so more of that would unfold later in life. But so that was something that I carried with me. I wasn't wanted. I was basically forced upon someone. And in some ways that was true, because when my mom found out she was expecting me, she was actually separated from her husband. And so she had an unexpected pregnancy with someone else. And that led to me needing to search for my father for many, many years. And so my mom had a lot of challenges that, she was in. And so with this particular stepfather, this is what I was telling my dad. I was saying he didn't want me. And it was the next day I actually felt, so that man, John, has since passed away, and I actually felt him very near. And I could hear these words that came to my mind. And the words were simply, Lorrie, it's not that I didn't want you. It's that I didn't understand you. And I think that's true. I think you end up sometimes in parental situations where somebody just doesn't get you. And one of the things that he didn't get, and one of the things that he labeled me as, was he called me dingy, airheaded, and said I had no common sense. And it's interesting, as I've raised 7 children now, I've seen each one of my children go through stages where they don't necessarily behave particularly mature. Or
no, not children.
Would you say? Not maybe as wisely projecting themselves. And as an adult parent now, I'm going, wow, this is so normal. This is so normal. And so during those seasons when you would behave that way, I would think, oh, well, this is how I was treated. What am I going to say and do to help my children rise up to their potential, instead of labeling them in their moment of transition from childhood to adulthood, right? From that stage to getting wisdom. So there was a sitcom on TV called, in the 70s, I think, late 70s, called Alice. And in this sitcom, in fact, during this presentation I was doing with these homeschoolers just this last week, I brought up this movie and I said, what were the characters? And so they all knew, or several of them knew the 4 main characters. One was Melon, was the cranky owner of the place, and I think he was the cook. And then there was another one, Alice, who was the main character, and she was one of the waitresses in the cafe. And then there was Flo, and she had all these sassy slogans from the South. Kiss My Grits was one of them, so that somebody would remember that if they saw the show. And then there was Vera. And so this person from my presentation said, yeah. I said, which one was Vera then? And she said, the ditzy one. And just even hearing that stung a little bit, but I owned it. And I said, you know, that was the name, Vera, that my stepfather gave me. And he gave it to me for so long that even when I was married, it was on the letters that he sent to me after I left home. Instead of my name, it was Vera. And so that was reinforced in my head over and over and over again, that I was airheaded and I had no common sense and I was dingy. Those were the 3 labels. And so interestingly, after Brian and I was probably 18 or 19 years old, and I was at school in BYU, and I had laundry to do. This is just a fascinating transition. I had laundry to do, and I went to a laundromat, and the machine to take your bills wasn't working, so I couldn't do my laundry. And I sat in my car and I had to think, what do I do? I can't do my laundry. I don't have change. And so I looked in my surroundings, and then I saw that there was a bank nearby. I went to the bank, exchanged my bills for some quarters, went in and did my laundry. And it was kind of sad in that moment, because I really felt the sense of satisfaction that I figured out how to get change from my bill into quarters, because it had been so enforced upon me that I had no common sense. So that can be so damaging. You can understand, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So as time went on, it wasn't actually until a little while ago I started rethinking Vera, and I looked up that episode on the internet, and I saw the credits with the music in the background. And there's an opening scene where Vera opens a box of straws, and she's startled a little bit, and the whole box of straws just fly everywhere. And so that was kind of the image that I think, I was perceived as when I was young. And the more I stayed in this episode, the more I started seeing these other sides to Vera that were really endearing. She was very sweet. She was very devoted. She was an integral part of this trio of friendship that these girls had. And even though she said some things that were kind of silly or ridiculous, she was really worth loving. And I took that portion of her as well. And I realized also that
you really are worth loving, by the way.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. But would you agree that when you look at people's characters and just their evolution, when you take on labels, it kind of keeps you in this package that's so limiting? But just seeing the bigger picture and seeing who she really was, and I thought, I'd like to have a friend like her, actually. And so I took that experience from my Vera days, so to speak, and I purposefully used that to propel my children into a state of power. And I spoke words of compliments and pointed out your gifts, and I tried not to focus on your weaknesses. So even in that, my stepfather did not understand me, and so he labeled me in my weakness instead of enforcing my strengths. And so I feel like I've seen the fruits of the opposite behavior as a parent, just identifying what my children's capacities are and helping them to feel like anything is possible, and that they're intelligent and wise and useful, and they're meant to make a difference in this world.
And none of us are perfect, by the way.
Yeah.
We're not a perfect family by any means. And each of us kids, children, we've all had a lot of different strengths, a lot of different weaknesses. And it was cool to see both my parents and the way that they viewed us, because some of our weaknesses were more obvious or more apparent than others. And even then, even though some of our weaknesses were very frustrating to our parents, maybe some of us were a little bit more rebellious than others. Some of us were just like me. I was kind of known for being a little slower getting things done. or making sure I'm ready to leave, little things like that. But that's not what they focused on. Even though it's almost like common joke a little bit among us, we could playfully talk about it. We always brought seriousness and almost like a little bit of sacredness on the good things that
And
we had
we talked
and our
about
successes. And
we talked about the difference between being light-minded and light-hearted, and that we could never slip into being light-minded with each other, because that's usually at the expense of another person. But being light-hearted was critical, being fun and having a lot of laughter.
Yeah, no, that's it's just so cool to see. It's fun to have a mother-son on the show, because I've never had that before, but to see the dynamic of those things, something that stuck out, you're going back to this experience with new eyes. Mm-hmm. And too often we get stuck in the broken record routine of playing our past back to us. And because we've had this past experience as movie, we keep replaying. Every time we replay it, we attach a new lens to it. And it can become this very consuming, damaging thing for ourselves. And it's reconfirming things that are not true about ourselves to ourselves. And so we end up feeling worse and worse about ourselves. But I'm a firm believer that you can change your past. And people think, well, how could it already happened. It's facts. It's like, no, because the facts, you don't even remember what the facts are anymore. Nobody really remembers what the facts are anymore. But your perception of the original experience, that's changed so many times, and it's just gotten uglier and uglier. If we're able to reach back and actually go back to that initial experience, go back to the Vera, and say, okay, now that I know who I've become, now that I actually know what my gifts are, now that I have perspective, you can go back and say, wow, that was actually that was a compliment. Now that may not actually be how he meant it, but that doesn't matter, because it's all about your perspective. And by you doing that, you're actually changing the way you look at your entire past, which then changes your identity and propels you into an entirely different future by changing your past. And I think it's critical that we do change our past every day. We
get more insight about the past. So we've talked before, I think during a personal conversation, where Troy Dunn used to have a show where he helped connect long lost family members. So either through adoption, or maybe there was somebody, conceived and the father didn't know, like in my particular situation. And he used to say something. In fact, I wrote to the show when I was searching for my dad, and I said, my dad doesn't know I exist and I don't have a name. Is there anything you can do to help me? And because one of the things Troy Dunn used to say at the beginning of his show was, you can't have peace till you have all the pieces. And I found that really significant, because I felt like I was being tormented all the time trying to figure out, what part of me belongs to my dad, and why am I the way I am? And so if you take an arrow and you throw it without the bow, it will go a certain distance. That's true. But if you put the bow with the arrow and then you pull on the back, which is metaphoric of pulling on our past, right, on the back end of us, then it can propel us forward. And we talked also about the word forsake. And so in the scriptures, when the word forsake is used, it's, forsake your sins, or forsake your past, or stop that behavior, right? But another explanation for that is that you preach against it. And so one thing that I really appreciate in scripture are the characters who maybe had been making really bad choices and then changed their lives, and then use the lessons that they learned from their mistakes to actually empower the people that they preach to. And so that was one thing with our children. We tried to say, these are the mistakes we made, or these were the things committed against us, and it affected us this way. So you can learn, as Allison Larson says, from counsel or consequence. So we've tried to use a lot of counsel instead of consequence, although they're going to have natural consequence as well. But there came a time too, there's another question you can ask. Anne Washburn often says this, and she says, what else might be true? So the man my mom thought was actually my father. Probably almost 25 years ago, we contacted him, and he had no idea that there was a potential daughter out there. We contacted him. I flew back to Minnesota. We had a secret meeting in a little cafe in a little town in Minnesota, the things movies are made out of, right?
Wow.
It was a pouring rain day, and I had such hopes for the first time, that I was going to meet my father. And I had sent pictures of my whole family, and it was uncomfortable. It was very hard. His wife was, who wasn't married to him at the time when I was a baby, but she was very suspicious, and she wondered what my motives were. So I was put under the microscope, of course. And so when we met each other, my husband and me and these two in this cafe, they were very, she was at least very cold. And he was in an uncomfortable position as well. I was filled with all this hope about, oh, I'm finally going to meet my dad. But instead, she basically said, instead of small talk, she pushed the envelope of my pictures back to me, and she said, we want a DNA test. And it turned out to be humiliating, a horribly humiliating experience. Like, we don't want anything of you at all until we find out that, in fact, you are connected to him. And so again, this feeling of just sheer rejection just sunk in my heart, right? And so my mom knew that we were going to do this test. And I said, okay, we're going to end up doing this. And is there anything you need to tell us? And she said, no. And the test results came back, and they were negative. And from that point on, whatever happened in my mom's world, she had no further information she could give me. There was nothing that she told me from that point on regarding who my potential father could be. So on that day, we drove away from the cafe in this pouring rain, and we went to this street, this barren street, and parked in the dark. And I just wept and wept and wept. And my husband said to me, it's like what I was feeling inside was what was happening in the weather outside the car. And my husband said to me, I'm so sorry, honey. Nothing could have prepared you for this. And so I was just trying to integrate all of this. And I looked over at my husband, and as I was crying, and he was just perfectly still with his head bowed. And all he could do in that moment was pray that I could be comforted. So we went to another little place to eat. And on my way out, one of those circular stands that has little trinkets or books or something that you can buy by the register. Yeah. There was one that had these little books in them. And I felt impressed to buy one of these little books, something I don't typically ever do. I walked outside, and I opened up the page with the rain trickling down. And on the page to which I opened, it said, be grateful your mother gave you life. And I remember thinking that even though my Father in heaven knows this is really, really hard, I still need to be grateful she gave me life, that I'm alive, and that I can create the life that I ultimately want. And so it would take many, many years after that. I don't know what was happening in my mom's world at that time. It must be been really hard. He knew what was going on, and he needed me to go into a state of gratitude, which I did. And there's still a lot that I don't understand, but I do know that there's more to this story, and it's going to end beautifully, because I'm willing to stay the course, and I'm willing to trust the process. And as I continue to get insight and wisdom about my life experiences, I'm more useful to the people who come to me looking for help and support. And if I might add one more thing, many years ago, I've always had this passion for wisdom. Would you say that, Josh? Yeah. And
most definitely.
Yeah. And I want to speak words of wisdom to help people to just breathe. And I think the world is thirsty for wise words.
And that's why I love words so much too. Like you mentioned earlier about breaking down words. I love to do that as well. And it all was rooted in her and her love for language as well.
So one day I was actually kneeling in prayer, and I was asking specifically, would you bless me with the wisdom of Solomon of old? Because the story. What's the most famous story about Solomon? That
the baby getting almost cut in half.
Exactly.
Basically.
So as I was recounting, I was thinking that's the type of wise person that I want to be, taking a really difficult situation and knowing what to say to resolve it. And the answer that came to me was, Lorrie, you have always asked this of me. Some wisdom can be granted and other wisdom must be earned. And do you know the word learned is actually earned with an L? And so there are some experiences that are hard, and we pay a price for the wisdom that we gain, which means we earned it. And some wisdom can be granted, that's true. But in Solomon's case, because he understood the love of a mother for her child, he had the wisdom to know what to do. So I think, at least when I work with my clients or with my family, I seek to understand. If I can understand more, like when my stepdad said, I just didn't understand you, thus he didn't know what to do with me. Mm-hmm. He didn't know how to raise me. So when we gain greater understanding, then we can be more effective in doing our job more successfully, whatever it might be. Would you say, Josh?
Yeah, no, I would completely agree as well. It comes down to being willing to understand, because if you're not willing to understand, then that is really difficult. And a lot of people, they come into things, and I'm guilty of this as much as the next guy, I'm sure, come in with very preconceived ideas, preconceived opinions. I'm generally somebody who's very, very committed to my own inner expectations of myself, with very little commitment to any outer expectations of me. And so the way to get Samuel to do something is to help him understand why he should expect something of himself.
Got it.
That's how you get Sam to do something.
That's the catalyst.
Oh, as soon as I believe that I should expect it of myself, I can be committed to it. But if it's an outward expectation, then I will question pretty much till eternity of why I should be doing something. And I won't be consistent. It's just not great until I feel I should be, and I gain that inner commitment to that. But I think it's interesting because that's something that holds me back from reaching my next level. Is sometimes I get these mentors, I get people who are willing to coach me, I get people who are willing to believe in me. I have experiences, spiritual experiences or other experiences where I've been instructed, to do things, but because of my lack of understanding and probably in a lot of cases my pride, too prideful to ask for understanding, then I end up just not doing. It's a stumbling
block.
That's something that holds me back, and that's a stumbling block for me to reach my next potential. I'm curious for you, what do you feel like is holding you back from reaching your next step or your next launch forward and reaching your potential?
In response to what you were just saying, Neil A. Maxwell said something that I've always loved. And so I think there's, as much as I desire understanding, and it will forever be, there's also a sense of trust that we have to kind of surrender to. And he said that the Lord often gives instruction without explanation. And so we're not always going to understand on a spiritual level why we need to do a certain thing or why somebody else did a certain thing in their life to us. We may not get those explanations on this side of the veil, actually. But I think what, if anything, could potentially hold me back, it is that yearning to, understand as much as I can and to just be able to be okay about the portion that I'm being given each day that I need to be satisfied with, because I honestly have come to understand that there are times when I'm pleading for understanding, but I don't have the experience in order for the Lord to build on that and go, do you see? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, I completely get it. Yeah, same boat. It sounds exactly the same to my life. And it's like,
so sometimes we have to have a few more years under our belt before he can point something out and say, okay, this is now your piece to that puzzle. And that can be really helpful. So I'm just trying to be patient and have him work it out. And in the meantime, I'm trying, I'm focusing on being an instrument in other people's paths to help them to say, I really understand, let's team together and get to where you intend to go. There's a lot of coaches out there who teach about goals, which I do as well. And there's a lot of power behind their system and, people who know what they want and let's do this and get to a certain destination. I'm a little different. I'm a very good listener. I try and help make sense of their suffering. I help them find the nuggets in their circumstances so that they can start seeing the divine orchestration of their lives. And I help them to come up with a plan to process their pain and turn it into something that can be peaceful. And it's really important to understand that peace doesn't mean you're free from triggers. Healing doesn't mean you're free from triggers. What I teach clients is just assess the amount of time it takes you to recover from a trigger. So if you recover relatively quickly because you have tools in place to get you to that next place and you choose not to sink, you can feel pain and you can feel sorrow and some suffering, but you have what you need to get out of that. To make life meaningful, you have to have the joy with the sorrow, right? Mm-hmm. It's never going to be free from that. Exactly. So I don't invite people to expect that. I say, let's look at what package you've been given and let's see how beautiful it can become in your mind.
Yeah, I completely agree that's probably the best way of saying it. It's like you've been given a package of your life, and every experience, I firmly believe this, every experience happens for me in my life. It's a gift from whoever chooses to give it to me, and I get an opportunity to grow. And so how can I make that be the most beautiful, loving, meaningful experience? How can I draw the most positive meaning out of that, and take that and carry that legacy on?
And also honor the struggle, mm-hmm. and know that some things are just really, it wasn't good. It wasn't pleasant. It was just hard. And that's part of what we agreed to when we came here.
Sure.
It's just hard.
Those experiences that just weren't good and were hard, how much wisdom, how much information, how much positive things came from you learning at a young age that was not okay.
Because you earned it.
Rather than being the parent who then didn't learn the lesson from it, still thinks it's okay, and then is perpetuating it. Imagine that situation, right? So even as bad as things can be, I feel like there's always if you choose to, there's always a positive way to look at these things. And that's really, again, one of my missions is helping people go back to their experiences, identify what identities they've chosen into, and rather than focusing on what identities they've been given or been chosen into, creating their own identity, mm-hmm. identifying their identity that's inside of them. If they were to close their eyes and find out how to identify where they are in their body, what do they believe in, who are they, and then build a foundation of identity that they're able to go and build their meaningful legacy. And so I'm curious what you would say, and this would be the final question here, but what do you feel so I need to phrase this better. If you're now passed away and your great-grandchildren are talking to their friends about who their great-grandmother was, what do you want them to be saying about you?
So let's go back to my friend who I said I was very envious of. What I've realized is that anyone who has been given this really beautiful package, somewhere along that family line, someone paid a price to get that legacy in place. And when I look back at my friend's life and I realize the faith of this one ancestor that she had, he was actually a prisoner of war during, I believe, World War II. And he was such a man of faith that even though he basically lived off rice and algae, he kept track on a calendar of every fast Sunday that would come. And on that fast Sunday, he would give up his food, his little portion, and share with others so he could honor what his particular faith practiced, which was the first Sunday of every month, not eating, fasting, and reflecting upon the Lord. So somewhere in that legacy, someone paid a price to give that strength to the children that came later. And if my great-grandchildren look back on me, what my hope is that they will consider me having been one of those people to have paid the price to give them what they have all those years later, and to have done it willingly and without resentment, and to be able to teach that from the place that I came from, that there's still so much value in that, and to choose to keep the good, like the quote earlier, that you take the best and leave the rest.
Right.
So.
Can I add something just very
go for
quickly
it.
to that? So in our faith, we are people of faith. We definitely love God. And in my reading recently, there's been a phrase used often, which is to remember the deliverance of our fathers. And it's used often by prophets in scriptures to tell the people. And I hope that I can tell my children, if they're ever having a stubborn day or a hard time, remember the deliverance that happened to your grandmother or your grandfather, or to anyone in our family that we've seen have taken their lives and fueled a legacy that is righteous, it's good, and that's been profitable to us. And I hope that when I tell them that, they can look back and they can say, wow, and give credit to not only their strength and their willpower, but that there is someone who's backing us in this life, who's supporting us, whoever you want to call your higher power. We'll call them God and Christ. But they're backing us, and they're helping us in this delivering process. They're placing everything in our path in that package to provide those opportunities to grow and to become something better that we could have been prior. I hope that when they look back at my mom, and hopefully me as well, they can say, wow, if they can be delivered from these tragic trials and get through it, I know that I can get through this. And that's the price that's paid. If we can get through those in whatever means that we know that we can, they will have that strength where they can draw upon our experiences and move forward with faith, not just faith in God, but faith that if I come from that type of person, I know I have it in me.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing, I had a dream some years later, and some years ago, and I was doing laundry in my house, and I had this understanding that there were multiple people in my living room, and they were waiting for me to come and talk to them. And the people in my living room were actually people that were from my past, not the ones who had been the offenders, but definitely some who were part of that experience with me. And I was angry, and I didn't want to go speak to them, and I wanted to avoid them. And so I kept doing my laundry, and finally I knew that they weren't going to leave until I dressed them. And so I took my laundry basket on my hip, and I walked down the hall, and I landed right in front of the doorway of this living room where they were all seated. And I put my laundry down, which is actually symbolic. I put my burden down. Mm-hmm. And I was ready to just accuse, and I was ready to just vent and express my frustration about, what things that had happened. And I just had all this pent up emotion that I was ready to thrust out, and I could see in their faces this trepidation of how I was going to respond. And all of a sudden, as with all of this emotion coming up into my throat, something miraculous happened. And in an instant, when I wanted to spew this anger, instead, I started to feel a bright light that came from behind me and just kind of settled down. And the only thing that I could get out of my throat and through my mouth to these people was, God loves us all. And I saw their faces just relax and their whole bodies just melt. And in that moment, I was taught a truth that though I had difficult experiences, so have most people in life on some level. And we are all his children, and he loves us all as we're trying to work through this. And my level of condemnation shifted to a level of understanding regarding how, we're all trying to just work out our lives. And some do better than others. But in that moment, it was a gift that I was given. And so I could end today with that I absolutely know that our Father in heaven, our God, whatever you would like to call him, he loves us all. And there's purpose in our pain, and there's meaning in our suffering, and it can make us better.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's an awesome legacy. Thank you for sharing, Josh. That's a it's a awesome perspective, because every generation, everybody is going to have something to be delivered from and something to pass down and something to share to strengthen the next generation. And so thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being here today. I know we kept you longer than we planned, for sure, but I am just so grateful for you, Lorrie, and for you bringing your son, Josh, and that you guys were able to share such personal experiences. And I invite everybody to go through and really think about what lessons that you were able to be a part of today. And then also, as you enjoy what you're listening to, comment on it, like it, share it on social media, tag both Lorrie and myself. That way we can give you a shout out on the next podcast. But it's just, I would say go follow her on Instagram and Facebook.
I actually need to set up my Instagram.
She needs to set up her Instagram.
Find me, Lorrie Richins, or comment, and I can help in that way if they're interested in the services that I render.
Yeah, and I'll put a link to her Facebook in the show notes here. But definitely, if you're finding this on some podcast platforms, they don't have everything. So go and look her up on Facebook and reach out to her. She's definitely willing to contact and talk over Facebook Messenger. That's how we met. So I look forward to that. And thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for joining us today. If what you heard resonated with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me so I can give you a shout out on the next episode. And thanks to all those who have left a review. It helps spread the message of what it really takes to build a legacy that lasts. Catch you next time on Fueling Your Legacy.